Hello, I'm Andre Portgitter from Broll Auctions and Sales. Welcome to Summer Place. Summer Place is one of South Africa's premier conference centres and iconic venue. Summer Place is situated in Hyde Park, just minutes away from the Sandton CBD and on the Golden Mile. With world-class amenities and park-like gardens, the possibilities are endless. Recreate the history and continue the legacy of Summer Place. Welcome to the ballroom, where the top echelon of society and royalty dine and mingle. This is the most incredible piece of real estate. Going on auction. For more information, please contact me.
In a world of constant change and innovation, trust is key, knowledge is power, and the inside track is everything. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host, Bruce Whitfield.
How can you not love an introduction like that one? Thank you, Craig. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Inside Track. Two great guests for you today. Ismail Hendricks, who's the chief auctioneer. We'll try and keep his sentences short and his delivery slow. He's the chief auctioneer at Broll Property Auctions, as well as John Loos today. John, of course, is the property economist at FNB. And you've delivered a great report here, John, into the state of the retail property market and into the state of rentals. And it's the office market that continues to lag, unfortunately. Just people aren't going back to the office in the way that certainly the bosses hope, but more that their landlords would have hoped.
No, the office market is the underperformer, Bruce. You know, office and retail both have a key structural change in the way we either consume or work. The work from home surge, it's a long-term trend, but it got a bump up through with lockdowns, forcing it on us. And then retail's got the online retail, coming our way in a bigger, or more significantly in the years to come. But it doesn't seem from our broker surveys and all the other evidence that the online retail has really challenged the retail property sector to the extent that the work from home challenge has challenged the office sector. So of the three big commercial sectors, I still see industrial in the relative pound seats, retail somewhere in the middle, and the office is the laggard.
Did you look at manufacturing data in South Africa? It's like we don't make anything anymore. What on earth is going on in that industrial sector that is leading to demand for industrial property in the way that your report suggests it does?
Seems to be the positive impact of gearing up for greater online retail, Bruce, and greater logistical needs. And so, online retail sort of probably a slight negative for the retail property sector, but a positive for the industrial and warehouse sector. I think that's a big part of it, is that structural change positively impacts the warehousing and logistics part of industrial.
Is there a lot of new build happening in that sort of industrial sector where the warehouses of 20 years ago just no longer fit for purpose for what's going on in 21st century logistics, or is there an adaptation going on?
No, it appears to be quite a bit of new build as well. If one looks at the building statistics, the strongest, look, it's not shooting the lights out. It's not a building boom of pre-2008 levels, but yes, the share of industrial building, if you take the square meterage of plans passed for the three key commercial sectors, office is in decline as a share, retail is in decline, industrial very noticeably increasing its share.
Well, that's a little piece of good news. I mean, in terms of valuations, what's happening to valuations? Because that late 90s, mid 2000s boom led to a huge expansion in property across all of the main sectors, some of which are now sitting vacant and some of them are sitting derelict, particularly downtown Johannesburg. I took a little drive the other day. Don't do that in a hurry. Some parts of town are absolutely flourishing.
Look, we've had a national, if one looks at all commercial property, we've had valuations declines over in 2020 and probably last year. We've only got first half data for last year, which was negative, but probably as a commercial property as a whole declining last year too. In real terms, where you get some capital value growth, but it doesn't keep up with general inflation. You've had real declines since a few years before lockdowns. So there's been this broader correction. All property real value correction, when I use GDP inflation to adjust, is probably down about 29% since I think about 2015 or so, 2016. So there has been a noticeable correction. But I think where we get to now in 2022 at least is that nominal values stop declining in industrial and start to inflate, possibly in retail too. But I think in office space, probably another year of declining actual values. So it becomes a bit of a split where two of the three sectors possibly back into positive territory.
So it's not really a bounce back more than a sort of a shuddering reverb more than anything else, it would seem.
Yeah, a lot of things are just normalizing after the lockdown dip and the all-out decline in average values. We just get back to where industrial could be positive in real terms as well, but for retail possibly still negative in real terms, but at least positive in nominal terms. That's where I sort of see retail, and then still all-out value decline in the office sector.
And again, it's always the case, though, isn't it? I mean, the cream rises to the top. You're not going to have too many vacancies in prime retail property. Tenants can become a lot more picky. Tenants can become far higher negotiators, far stronger negotiators in an environment, perhaps in the B grade property and less brilliant property. There are opportunities to be had, I would think.
Well, it's difficult to know what prime is these days because, what we've been seeing in recent years is the bigger, the super regionals and regionals taking more strain. Now, those have been regarded typically as prime properties, but, maybe it's time to rethink what we regard as prime, and perhaps it's the smaller, well-run, well-functioning convenience centers and community centers, whereas the bigger ones have more challenges perhaps with the online retail, that's coming our way. So at the moment, it's very difficult, what is prime and what isn't prime. It's not just a case of lower quality is not prime and higher quality is prime. It's changing a bit, and I don't pretend to have all the answers. It also depends on the response to the looming online retail challenge.
We've recently been through a State of the Nation address, which was the most realistic, probably State of the Nation address of the Ramaphosa presidency. It was an acknowledgement that government can't do anything. It's stuck and needs private sector help, which I saw as a huge positive. And we had a budget come out which kind of supported that. We had a budget also that bought us some time to do the structural reforms that we keep begging, pleading, and getting nosebleeds over. I'm wondering if there was anything in the State of the Nation and in the budget that gives you a sort of sense of optimism that we don't have this really revolting 2% growth rate that we've become so used to over the last decade.
Not yet, Bruce. I think I think there is a growing realization that government can't do everything, that it's far too widely spread. But in the national government finances just can't handle all these, bailouts for an airline and bailouts for an electricity utility and so on. You need to allow the private sector in much more. But, I don't think just privatizing an airline is going to do it. It's got to be on a much grander scale. I think the ideological shift has to be towards where government sees itself. If you take a body like FIFA, it's the government of football. It only regulates. That's what it really does. It's a relatively small organization relative to the size of the sport that regulates and tries to regulate well and focuses on regulation of the sport. And the private sector, which is the football clubs, play the game. I think that's where we've got to get to, where government by and large doesn't deliver. It regulates, creates a well-regulated, competitive environments for the private sector to flourish in sectors such as transport sectors, electricity sectors, education sectors, and many other, and becomes a lot smaller. I think that's where we've got to go, and we're still not on that page yet.
Yeah, and it's a great analogy on that one, John. I mean, we've just had increased complexity introduced, of course, into 2022, just as COVID felt like it was going out of the back door, the front door open, and in walked a nuclear arsenal in the form of Vladimir Putin, Ukraine, and goodness knows how that plays out over the next 12 to 18 months or so, because regardless of any sort of overtures and peace talks and all of that sort of stuff, Vladimir Putin has made his intentions very clear in terms of an imperialist ambition. That then throws into absolute uncertainty, once again, the way the United States responds to its inflation problem and changes perhaps the rates outlook. How are you reading those tea leaves right now?
That's probably a bit early to say. It depends on, we'd expected an oil price shock, and that sort of hasn't happened significantly yet. It's early days in this.
Look what happened to petrol prices. I mean, petrol prices the other day up enormously, record levels of petrol prices. So bad that our government could find it within themselves to raise fuel taxes.
A lot has to do with, I guess, with other supply constraints and disruptions. And it's not just about the Ukraine conflict just yet. So how the Ukraine specifically plays out, I think, still remains to be seen. But I think where the world is going is to a more protectionist type of environment. There sort of seems like Cold War II is brewing with, be it Russia and China. The US has long since started to see China, the Trump administration was starting trade wars with China. So I think that's what this all works against to a certain extent is globalization and free trade. And, a world that's probably going towards more protection, not less. And that's a less efficient planet and probably a lower growth planet. So that's the one side of it. In the short term, yes, if the Ukraine conflict creates, sort of threatens global growth, through an oil price shock or whatever it may be, possibly central banks not trying to dampen the inflation, possibly being a bit more lenient on interest rate hiking and inflation due to recessionary pressures. But I think it's too early at this stage to see just how this pans out.
If we just square that circle before I move on to Ish and talk about, we saw the ad at the beginning of the segment, a very exciting, probably coming on stream next month. But just to square the circle, as we thought that we were getting a little bit of certainty back, we were just reminded that we actually control nothing and that the world remains insane and crazy. And, rates in South Africa are probably going to go up because inflation is a problem. But we simply can't, the forecastability for 2022 has almost evaporated.
Oh, yes. No, absolutely. It sort of seems to lurch from one crisis creating uncertainty to the next. And certainly, at least that's one thing, the Ukraine conflict and the sanctions and who knows what retaliation from both sides does, it renews a new uncertainty. If we don't have enough already, it looks like the COVID crisis is becoming less of a threat, but, there's something else, Cold War II, some people are calling it, creating more.
I'm touching wood, John Loos. I'm touching wood to make sure that COVID goes, that we can deal with Vladimir Putin. Ish, talk to me about auctioneering. Talk to me about the whites of people's eyes as they sit in audiences, as I'm sure they're sitting in the physical audience in front of you. You might even be having some virtual auctions and people putting up their hands up virtually. What are the whites of their eyes telling you in terms of the health of the market? The Economist has a theoretical view and a data-driven view. You have the pulse view of what the buyer is thinking.
So first of all, I totally disagree with John.
Excellent.
Totally disagree with John. So that's where we're going to start. No, I'm just kidding. Bruce, I must say, just to start, a quick reflection. I was in your panel about 10 years ago, and you won't remember that. But it's taken me 12,000 properties and 250 auction events to come back onto the panel. So finally, I've made it back to the Bruce Whitfield show. So I'm quite honored to be here. So thank you very much for hosting.
No, exactly. And so you better perform better this time.
Absolutely,
you better perform this time. You started well with pretending to disagree with John, but already my levels of apprehension are declining.
So over the past 20 years, I've been up on the podium and taken to auction some of the best commercial, industrial, residential properties throughout South Africa. We're currently in a cycle now, and I've seen it sort of post-COVID, where what John is talking about, the economy thudding along, what I'm finding in the whites of people's eyes at the auction floor is very much sort of pause and hold. I'm not finding that frenzy of buyers coming to the auctions and paying ridiculous yields for retail property. What I'm finding is that the guys are very cautious, and they're saying to me, "Look, Ish, it's easy to buy the property. That's the easy part, because the interest rates are still okay. It's climbing, but it's still fine for now. The hard part is, what John was talking about, is the tenancy, the covenants. So you can buy the property, but how do you actually work? How do you rework the property? How do you guarantee a stable income? How do you make sure that your escalation in your lease is actually going to kick in and there's upside for you? That's the challenge of the guys at the moment. So people are shifting to smaller spaces in the retail space. There's less traffic in the retail properties. So that's what the guys are experiencing. Coming to the auction is the easy part. They say, yes, I'll come to the auction, but help me find a strong national tenant in a good trading node. That's kind of the feedback I'm getting from the guys.
So you've now become, you're becoming a matchmaker as well. You're expected to deliver the tenant with a 10-year lease and an escalation of 8%. Not quite, but I'm sure that's exhibits, I suppose, the pressure that people are under. What surprised you in the last year of auctions in terms of what has and has not moved?
In terms of what has and has not moved, look, the generic themes are out there. The office space is challenged, especially sectional title office space. When people buy these big office blocks, the whole play is to convert to residential or student accommodation. Those themes are already out there. What has surprised me from a positive perspective is that there's been a shift sort of to invest in township retail properties. Now, I think it's always been there, but it's becoming more prominent for the guys. So they're saying to me, hang on, I want to invest in that property. It's got a ShopRite, for example, as an anchor tenant. It's right next door to the taxi rank and the train station and the bus stop. There's a lot of foot traffic around there, and they're trading well. So it makes sense to invest in that type of property. And if you look at the share price of ShopRite, 3 years ago, I think it was 90 Rand, and now it's 225 Rand. And I compare that facetiously to Woolworths, where it's kind of like, been going downwards. So for me, the guys are saying...
But even if you compared it to Pick n Pay, I mean, Pick n Pay has flatlined for an awfully long time. Woolworths' issues are outside of South Africa rather than inside of it. But yes, ShopRite has shown us what happens when you cut your cloth according to, you make your clothing according to your cloth. They've cut a whole lot of African markets. They're focusing in on South Africa. They know where their customer is. They know who their customer is. And they are wanting to serve that customer where it is convenient for their customer to be served. And that's what's playing out.
And that's exactly the model that the smart investors are following. So they're asking those questions, so if I buy this building, who's my customer base? Yes, it's the tenant, but who's their customer base? So the guys are having a sort of an overall, look at that and working backwards to investing in the right type of asset class.
And then talk to me about Summer Place, because that's coming on auction as well. It's a magnificent property. And it was so interesting seeing the aerial footage, wasn't it, of the location, which we know is central, and we know it's good, and we know access is good from multiple directions, multiple routes. But it's this, there's a city around it. Since who was the guy who built it a long time ago? Italian guy, had a troubled history. Yes. I forget his name. But it's a phenomenal piece of ground.
Did you get married at Summer Place, Bruce?
I'm sure you don't know to know about my weddings. My wedding. You don't want to know that. Could never afford it.
Look, I've auctioned about 12,000 properties to date, and I have to say this is one of the iconic ones that stand out. It's an absolute honor to present this property to the market. It's obviously iconic for those of viewers that don't know. It's in Johannesburg, in Sandton. It's one of the most iconic conference centers in South Africa, in Johannesburg. Banqueting facility, and it's just in a great position between Rosebank and Sandton CBD. So it's a superb location, and it's a great iconic landmark property set on about 40,000 square meters. So it offers a lot. We do think a lot of the inquiries have been around, purchasing the land and doing some sort of adaptation or conversion in the residential potentially space, rather than banqueting and conferencing. Although there have been inquiries along those lines, we are entertaining a whole broad of different inquiries, but the trend seems to be towards the resi space. I think the guys can actually leverage the asset and do something in that space for Summer Place.
It's going to be really interesting because, I mean, if you have a look around that area, you've had offices that have been built across the road. Gordon Institute of Business Science is down the road. On the other side of the road, developments have happened over the last 20 or 30 years, and some very luxurious developments. It's, again, prime property from a work perspective, from a play perspective, and certainly from a residential perspective. If that demand were to exist for that sort of high-end property in that part of town, it's all appropriate, I think.
Yeah,
Lots of usage.
Absolutely, and there's massive demand. And Bruce, I invite you to register and give it a go and put your bid in. You never know what could happen at the auction. And in fact, I know the auctioneer, so I can help you out.
What I'm thinking of doing is buying it, melting down the sculpture, and using that to pay off the property. Because I think the sculpture is probably worth a bob or two. Is that still there?
It is still there. It is still there. It is still there. It is still an iconic statue as well, and fit for an iconic property. I think it's going to be a very exciting auction. We're at the Summer Place venue itself on the 30 March 2022. So the auction kicks off, I think, at 12 o'clock. Oh, no, it's 11 o'clock. Sorry, it's 11 o'clock because it's a standalone auction. And all the details are on the website at www.brolauctions.com. So invite...
Is there a reserve? Is there a reserve? I'm chatting to my banker right now. Is there a reserve on the...
Bruce, work backwards from $1 billion.
Okay. I'm thinking I may need some friends. Ish, thank you very much indeed.
Sure,
Ish Hendricks is, you can hear by the pace of his delivery, Ish is the chief auctioneer at Broll Properties, and also to John Loos, the property economist at FNB. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us today on this edition of Inside Track. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Bye-bye.